Hey guys, Spence here. So, NieR Automata, or Automata, whatever you choose. This game was released by Square Enix and was developed by Platinum Games. The game was a result of the perfect storm in regards to game development, with known director Yoko Taro being the director of the previous NieR, being the director of this game, with the gameplay being done by Platinum, who also happen to be fans of the first game. In regards to NieR Automata's relationship to NieR, the first game, yes, NieR Automata is a sequel, and no, you do not need to play the first game to understand what's going on in Automata. The events of the first game only give slightly more context for what's going on in Automata, but even so, the information in the first game won't be anything that Automata doesn't tell you that's particularly important. The things that Automata doesn't tell you or aren't explained very well in regards to the first game are aspects that are more than a bit convoluted at best. In short, the game stands on its own narrative-wise, on its own plot threads, as opposed to the events of the past, at least 90% of the time. There are nods, but they're relatively infrequent and not impactful most of the time. Except for one point, but even that gets explained. So with that out the way, what exactly is going on in NieR Automata, or Automata, whatever. The basic premise of Automata is, in a far-flung future, aliens invade Earth, using machines known as Machine Lifeforms to do combat on their behalf. Humanity is forced to evacuate to the moon and send androids down to do combat for them on their behalf, and this conflict has been going on for nearly millennia. When the game begins, you take control of 2B, a special combat android, and with the assistance of 9S, a scanner android, you must go out in a post-apocalyptic world while doing combat with giant robots and helping out anywhere you can. Trying to avoid spoiler territory, which is really hard in this case. The plot is actually really good, and mainly thrives off of the interactions between characters and how they respond to the world and how their circumstances changes from their past to the present and the future. I guess you could say that's one of the main things about the game. Things change and the characters have to respond to it, and you see a very real reaction from them. One of the main themes about the game, and that the characters themselves find themselves tackling more often than not, is what does it mean to be alive and to exist within the world, especially considering their circumstances that are more than extraordinary, at least by our own standards. And maybe because it is a Yoko Taro game, in the beginning half of it, there's only intersprinkled moments of what the did I just see that after 40 hours of gameplay later, I wouldn't be able to give you an answer to. Meanwhile, in the second half, it becomes way more frequent and much more the norm. Which at that point, because it's a Yoko Taro game, nothing is really sacred, at least not by normal game standards, so you can take my word for it. And yes, this is the sort of game where you'll see the credits more than once. In short, the plot is good, and if you want a good sci-fi story, this is that in spades.
I wish you good hunting.
Glory to mankind. Glory to mankind.
Gameplay-wise, NieR Automata is very similar to its predecessor, but way more refined. This means it's an action RPG, leaning more towards the action side of things, with an open world, weapons to find and upgrade, a plethora of side quests, and fishing. Riveting. Control-wise, you can move around, jump, double jump, dash, which if you use with perfect timing with the enemy attack will allow you to perfect dodge and then counter with a light or heavy attacks which you can string together, and what those attacks will be will depend on what weapons you have assigned to the light and heavy attacks. But if melee combat is out of the question, then this is when your trusty companion Pod will come in handy. With the simplicity of a button press, he can fire off infinite munitions with his primary fire depending on what you set it to. It could be bullets or missiles or whatever pods you happen to find throughout the world, or he can use his program chip, which basically works as a secondary fire. These abilities vary and can be things such as firing off a laser, shooting off a wire that will pull you towards an enemy, or other things like defensive barriers. Combat is fast-paced and satisfying, as is the Platinum way. The thing is, you don't learn new moves as you progress through the game. It really depends on the combination of weapons you have equipped that determines the moves that you'll do. So you'll always want to experiment with new weapon types on having them as your light attack and heavy attack, especially considering each combination is different. Though this does mean you'll find all the weapon types long before the game's end and will likely have your favorites. Often, when traversing through the world of NieR Automata, you won't be going about it only through the means of a 3D plane. Very frequently, the game will change up your perspective and your controls accordingly, such as turning everything into a side-scrolling platformer, giving you a top-down view comparable to Diablo or older Legend of Zelda games, or turning everything into an over-the-top shoot-'em-up section. Now, while playing NieR Automata, you'll be doing one of three things mainly. 1, doing the main story quests where all the gameplay style transitions and all the cool stuff happens. 2, doing the side quests, namely for items and experience. And 3, collecting materials, either for upgrading your weapons, resupplying on healing items, or to buy weapons you couldn't afford before. The main quest is what it sounds like. You'll be given a task, and often things will go off the rails really fast, and this is where you'll have the most fun with the game, period. The side quests, however, are very half and half. Narrative-wise, they fit in the world very well, namely in showing off the attitudes that NPCs have towards the world itself, while often these quests won't go the way you expect them to. The bad news is these quests tend to be very, very generic. Usually, they'll have you killing certain enemies, collecting certain items, or killing certain enemies to collect certain items, talking to NPCs of varying distances from the quest giver themselves, and a lot of these quests are in chains, meaning that you'll go to the quest giver, get your objective, go out and do it, and then go back to the quest giver, get another objective, and go out and do that. This by itself isn't the problem, it's really the times when you can't really fast travel to alleviate the times that you'll spend doing the quest, and the fact you're doing the same mundane stuff you would do in other games. I know it's a bit unfair to expect more from Automata in regards to its questing, but at the same time, it doesn't really stop it from being mundane. And after a while, I stopped paying attention to side quests altogether. And lastly, when it comes to collecting materials, you probably won't need to do that intentionally very often. Healing items are inexpensive enough on their own, and you'll come across the money and materials you need to buy and upgrade weapons at a comfortable rate. You probably won't have to go out your way to find materials unless you're trying to upgrade specific weapons or gain enough money to buy more weapons. Also, there's the plug-in chip system, which I found kinda underwhelming. Basically, you find chips throughout the world that you can slot into your android that will increase their stats, namely their attack, HP, and the like. To get more room to plug in more plug-in chips, you can either go to a maintenance shop and buy more, or you can take off certain elements of your UI, like your health bar or the experience gauge, making it that you won't be able to see your life bar or experience gauge, but you'll have more room. Not that the experience gauge ever worked for me, I swear that thing never moved, even after I leveled up. The problem I have with the system is that a lot of the chips you can plug in are just number increases. Increased attack damage, increased defense, increased HP. Only some of them have particularly interesting abilities, like Shockwave, which gave your melee attacks range properties, or Deadly Healing, which healed you for a certain percentage of your max HP for each enemy you killed. The main problem I have with it, I guess, is that no matter what chips you plug in, it didn't really make operating your character in combat more fun, or the combat itself more fun. It just made it more efficient, if you get what I'm saying. The gameplay as a whole is very well refined. While you don't learn new moves as you progress through the game, well, outside of program chips and maybe gaining new weapon types you didn't have before, it's really you gaining mastery of the system and trying out new weapon combinations and finding out new combos that keeps the combat interesting, along with all the scenarios they put you through in the main quests. And the game is paced well enough so that even when you're doing the more mundane tasks in the main quests, it never really feels like it. Mainly because the world is so interesting that it usually can slide with that. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to those side quests though. Like I said before, while they fit in the world and have a lot of strength narratively, when it comes down to what you're doing in them, they just come off really uninspired when compared to everything else in the game that has such high quality to it. Presentation-wise, oh boy, how am I gonna parse through this? Stylistically, the game succeeds at portraying this familiar yet ancient dilapidated world that is being overtaken by nature. And a lot of the interface choices and digital effects that happen work very well in the game's favor of displaying the fact that you are an android, not a human. Like having digital effects go off if your android takes physical damage or having a software issue, and the interface choices as a whole. When it comes to the game's visuals, the character models look really good, which is a stark contrast to the environments which look pretty PS2-y at times. Which could easily be an artistic choice, but I doubt it. But the stylistic choices going on here easily cover up that shortcoming. It, however, does not cover up the actual running performance of this game. Basically, the game has issues running on older graphics cards. It's just a big case it doesn't perform nearly as well as it should, considering it's supposed to be running at 60. There is a mod release that allows you to modify the lighting settings, which if you turn them off completely, guess what? The game runs at 60 again. Yay! Why isn't that in the options menu, or I swear none of the options in there does anything for the game's performance? I have no clue. Something about a lighting bug, Oh, and regardless of what graphics card or if the mod was in or not, cutscenes always ran as if they're being held together by 14 FPS duct tape. Like, seriously, the game looks like it's going to crash sometimes when these things are going. I should preface this by saying that the game is definitely still playable, and I played a lot of the game like that, and I still had a good amount of fun with it, but if you're a stickler for over 30 frame rates, then you will either have to wait for this to get patched, make sure you have one of the newer graphics cards, and or put in the mod, because otherwise the game is not going to look good to you. Alright, now where was I again? Yes, in the sound department, when it comes to the sound effects, they are serviceable. The only thing I would say is that I'm tired of hearing the sound of metal on metal because, well, you're gonna hear a lot of that in combat. The voice acting is also really good, selling the interactions between characters, and when it comes to the actual music, it's definitely unique and something else entirely. A lot of the tracks have vocals to them that are in a made-up language that is sung very beautifully and definitely sells the idea of something familiar yet very alien at the same time. In other words, it's almost the same thing as the previous game, except now they have way more digital instruments and industrial sounds going on because of, the more cyberpunk bent to it as opposed to the previous. In short, the presentation is a big half and half. It has very good choices going on with it, it's just this port does not represent them very well with its inconsistent frame rate. And that's me putting it kinda lightly. So that's NieR Automata, or Automata, whatever you choose. Would I recommend this game? That depends. If you have the newest graphics card and computer bits, if you're willing to mod the game right off the bat, or if you're just gonna get the PlayStation 4 version. I really, really like this game. It has a great story, the action is great, the world is very well realized, has a bumpin' soundtrack, and while the graphics may be dated, namely the environments and hair, it still succeeds stylistically. So the fact that the PC version is muddled so heavily by these frame rate problems just really puts a big damper on the experience. It's still playable and a lot of fun, but if you're a stickler for high consistent frame rates, then you want to make sure you have a higher end PC right off the bat, and even then that doesn't guarantee if you're going to have a consistent frame rate. Hopefully with future patches they'll alleviate this, if not outright fix it. So in conclusion, it's a really good game, but a lot like the androids, it has some flaws. But while I can look past them, I know that's not the same for everyone. So like I said earlier, I hope they fix this sooner than later. Hello again, and thanks for watching until the end. If you happen to like this sort of content, drop a like, comment, subscribe, and maybe tell a friend who also be interested in this sort of content. In the meantime, I must make amends with my save file and see about playing a whole lot of catch-up.